Stephen Giuliano, thanks for coming on, my friend. Mate,
Thanks for
let,
having me,
let's
mate.
just let the listeners know a little bit about, we're hosting this interview today on, obviously, AimPoint. Can you tell us a little bit of background on who you are, where you kind of fit in the AimPoint circle, and what is AimPoint?
Yeah, so like yourself, I'm a passionate golf coach. Come from Australian PGA like system. I've been in that system now for 25 years, or I've been like a member for 25 years. I left Australia about 15 years ago, and I've been based out of Malaysia pretty much since then. I travel around. So yeah, I coach all parts of the game, but yeah, putting is definitely an area that I took more of a dive into, I guess, throughout my journey. And I got into AimPoint. Oh, this might surprise you. Over 15 years ago, really just because I struggled to teach green reading. Weirdly, putting was my strength, but trying to give someone insights into what you see is pretty tough. And I found, especially with one of my students, was probably the catalyst for me just wanting to understand more about the whole green reading space. And luckily, I was doing a conference in Asia, and Mark Sweeney, who's the founder of AimPoint, was doing this presentation. It was green topographies and all this data, and I was like, okay, it sounds interesting, but it was sounded like it probably wasn't really usable. But it was definitely a different angle on greens and green reading than what I would typically teach, which is sort of look at the high side, and largely it's a guessing game for players at any level. It's just that the more experience we gain, the better that we get at it. So obviously pros get really good at it, and they really get really good at understanding like finite slopes in the greens potentially, and that's why they can be really, really good green readers. So Mark, yeah, Sweeney, who's the founder of AimPoint, came up with this algorithm that could basically predict how the ball rolls across the green. And it wasn't even really anything teachable back when he first brought it out. And it was just a graphic that appeared on the Golf Channel, which you could still see on YouTube. So yeah, this line would appear on the screen, and a straight line would appear for the aim point. And that was basically the technology that then developed into this flip chart that we started teaching with for green reading, which is still kind of used today, but it's a very like old, and I'd almost say like outdated method and too technical way of reading the green. So anyway, I flew over to Orlando and I went through some training with him. He then came to Australia. I did more training, and essentially I became certified as an aim point coach back in, I'd say like 2008 or nine, sort of back then, and kind of started sort of softly teaching it.
So what are the benefits for someone who is to say attend a AimPoint school and like that, we're going to host together? What are some of the benefits that you see for students who do come to it?
So a little bit to finish that story, because I think it's important. So AimPoint back then was very technical. It then developed into something called the Express Read, which was actually just designed for kids. And that's now where we see the finger thing, which we were just talking off air, where pros are holding it. So the benefit is that you can probably take, I would say you can take 10, 15, 20 years of green reading experience, like take the best green reader in the world that you can think of right now, and bottle that into a 2 hour class. It's literally that. That's literally what the student gets in a 2 hour class. And I know you'd mentioned like which players are using it. In the top end, you've got Tommy Fleetwood, Justin Rose, Morikawa, Cameron Young, Ludwig's using it, Victor Hovland, Max Homa, to name a few. And there's a lot of like caddies using it as well. And Adam Scott was one of the pioneers of AimPoint. I guess he kind of put it on the map as far as the express read. But you've got like Sam Burns and Keegan Bradley using it as well. Sam Burns, obviously the number one putter in the world. Yeah, you've got all these elite US tour players. They're just US, not LPGA. But basically, we can give them that same information in a 2 hour class. And the class that we generally deliver, it's called a fundamentals class. We do have an advanced version, which does tack on more details, which ultimately, if you're really getting into it, you'd kind of want that knowledge. But 90% of your reads can be taught in this fundamental class. And literally, the student can be reading the greens as good as a Justin Rose, a Sam Burns, if you like, in a 2 hour session, which is pretty powerful because it's a tough skill to learn, especially in those developing years, as a golfer.
I definitely would think that green reading is one of the most undervalued aspects when it comes to the game of golf. I believe absolutely. And I think it's one of the most, I don't know what the correct terminology you use here, but unskilled golfers are at the green reading thing. So, what are the three principles of putting, right? The ability to get the ball to start on line, distance control, and green reading. Okay. Even in my putting school, we run through those three pillars there. And what's quite interesting that when we do the green reading exercise is the vast differences that people come up with on how much they think a putt's going to break over a 30
Right.
foot putt. So we might even see people in a variance of like 6 feet of where they think the high point of that putt is, or their aim point of where that putt is. So what I like about it as well, what you mentioned on there, Steve, is that you know, I love chipping. I love short game. I teach a lot of my short game stuff to a lot of golf pros independently of the short game stuff. And I teach the same things to the principals to 30, 40 handicappers that come to me, right? Same systems, same details. I think you've got every opportunity to chip the ball well, right? This is what you're saying there with putting, like the idea of that having a systematic approach on how to read the green and how to start your kind of your
Mhm.
putting pre-shot routine as well. Like I like to use the term phases, like phase one, phase two, phase three, phase four. And phase one is external data collection. And what you're saying there is that people have an opportunity to have like a systematic approach to how they hit their putts, right? Now, have you seen, Steve, um, would you say that even the higher handicap golfer would benefit this just as much as the low handicap golfer, right? If not more?
It's a good question. I mean, I think at the raw level, they would absolutely benefit from it. I mean, we clearly know that high handicappers have more challenges with putting, such as their start line capability and speed control.
Yeah.
But it definitely gets them in the ballpark. And I think it's tough with those high handicappers. What is actually their weakness?
Yeah.
Because you can give them a 5 foot putt on a perfect read, and maybe they have a hard time starting the ball online,
Yep.
something
Yep.
like that. So,
Yeah.
but it definitely puts them in the ballpark where they need to, not in the
Interesting.
ballpark. It puts them in a very like specific target where they need to, which I think then allows the coach to go, okay, that's an area we don't have to focus on now. It can be a start line issue, or it can be more of like a speed issue, which is really ultimately the two main areas that we focus on inside of 10 feet and maybe outside of like 10, 15 feet. And I think once that box is ticked, then it allows us then again to focus on those other key areas that you mentioned.
So the course is 3 hours long. Is that correct?
2 hours for the fundamentals course.
For the
Yeah.
fundamentals course, and we're hosting roughly 8 to 10 students in each one there. So, what will be some of the take homes that people will get from the fundamental course? What do you feel like that someone's driving home or they've got in their back pocket? What do you think are some of the principles that they will learn?
So we say this in every class in the intro. We cover from a putt length standpoint, short putt range, which is inside of 6 feet, which is about 2 meters. We cover mid range putts, which is just outside of that range, out to about 20 feet, which is again about 6 meters. And then we go long range, which is anything really outside of 25 feet. And we also cover double breaks. That's the fundamentals course. And within that, we learn how to feel side slope, which is really the foundation for being able to use AimPoint. And then we basically take students through the process of how do we then calibrate for short, medium, long range putts and double breaks. That's and the very cool thing with AimPoint, you can literally go out and play and use it that afternoon. Like if you were playing golf, if you did the class in the morning, you were playing at 1 o'clock,
Yeah,
you could actually use it. It's not like a full swing concept or
interesting.
idea, which could take a
Mm,
lot longer to be able to use in the golf course. It's literally usable on the golf course. And, with a little bit of training, if the student wanted to make sure they were really sharp, they could really stick with that confidence of taking to the golf course really forever. And the rest is really fine tuning from there. Like if students want to do additional work with AimPoint, it's more fine tuning.
So if we're going to host this fundamentals course up first, a couple of classes in a row, then perhaps we can revisit this down the track with a different version of a different class that you've got, like a
Yeah,
more
so we do
advanced
have
version.
for students that do fundamentals, they could do this, a few months later, for example, and they would go through. We talk about grain, like effect on grain in advanced. We have this thing called a directional read, which is really important when we get on big sloping putts, like downhill scenarios, uphill and downhill scenarios. We do advanced double breaks. We do bigger slopes because sometimes during the fundamentals class we tend to stick with slopes that go up to say about 4% only, so 0 to 4% versus like a lot of tilt, which can go up to like 8 to 10. So we do
Yeah.
cover bigger slopes, and we actually talk about how to use aim point for short game,
Okay.
or we go through we don't talk about we go through the concept of chipping with aim point, like short game shots.
Yes. And is this something as well that the player can take away and give them the tools to go practice this? Like, I'm assuming that once you do an aim point, you know, you got to go practice this, right? How often would you be encouraging people? That's probably a general question there, right? But would you be encouraging people to go practice this after the class?
So let's take a maybe an average serious golfer, someone that might, play like once a week and be able to go to the range like 2 times a week. That they may have one putting session a week, realistically, for 40 minutes or an hour. I would allocate at least like 10 minutes of that just to green reading skills, and you can kind of combine obviously other putting skills within that. If it's a competitive golfer that's probably practicing almost every day, well, they would be every day depending on, they would be doing green reading skills as part of their putting if they were practicing their putting 4 times a week. There'd be a
Yes.
stronger allocation of that. They're doing an hour and a half. I'd do at least like 30 minutes of very specific green reading. But some of that gets tied into putting itself. It's not just, okay, I just need to practice like my say slope feel or something like that. You can tie it in. But that's absolutely, I mean, these tour players have calibration tools that they're using daily to calibrate their feel, especially the caddies, just as much, because that is really, I'd say, one of the keys to keeping the green reading feel sharp.
Yeah. Okay. Now, this is a question without notice. I don't know if you got any quantifiable evidence for it. Something you did say to me in one of my podcasts I've been using ever since. Um, Tell me, out of the three principles there are putting, start line, distance control, and green reading, can you say which one you see that the most of the weakness? You have to say green reading. What is the biggest weakness you see amongst golfers? Generalize it or not?
Yeah, it's definitely, I'd say it's group specific as far as like when we're talking about their sort of current level for sure.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that green reading is probably the biggest variable. Like if you go to the highest level, because that's the area of the surface that's kind of like changing the most.
Yeah.
I think really good players can dial in their start line pretty good, and they're decent at speed. I think the green reading variable is probably the most challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I see, right, is that it's interesting when you think about those three principles, right, of putting. And, I've used this term a lot about, getting rid of the decision fatigue, when you're thinking, and I like processes, I like
Mm.
systematic approach, particularly to short game, right? There's no subject of conversation when it comes to start line. Really, distance control is that kind of, the internal feel. But you can sit there and say it's going to break right to left. This guy's going to say it's going to break left to right. It's like,
Mm.
that'll never happen. Like straight is straight and distance control is distance control. It's one of those things
Right.
that's up there that's, it's quite, yeah, up in there for, I guess, debate or discussion or, up there
Sure.
in the mind. I think is quite interesting when it does come to it. And, to me, when I played professional golf, there's nothing more that annoyed me the most. And I'll say to people in my putting school about, you can tell a reaction to someone on the TV when they've missed a putt if they didn't trust their line. You can tell by
Right.
the frustration that comes with it. You might see the old slap of the head on the cap because you can tell that they've changed their
Mm.
mind over the ball, right? And I think having a systematic approach like you've got with the aim point to kind of build a bit more trust within it to commit to your line without changing over the ball. Do you think that's something like that the person can take away?
Yeah, definitely. And this is a bit of a loaded question, but if you asked every golfer how many times have they stood over a putt, read the line, however they like to read the line, then
Yeah.
stand over it and look at it and go, well, this looks like I need to aim more or less. And in that moment, they change their, they change their
Uh,
process. They change their target. And how many times does that obviously affect them in like a negative way? I think the thing with aim point, and we would teach this as coaches, is it better to be decisive and miss than indecisive and perhaps get lucky occasionally? And so our goal with green reading, really with any part of the game, is to have the student rock solid on their decision and
mm,
trust that. And I don't think there's ever, you're never going to give yourself or beat yourself up too much if you have a good process and you keep making like good decision, and sometimes it doesn't work out for whatever reason. My speed was off. Yeah, maybe the read was off a little bit, but I think that is way more important than kind of guessing your way around and not really knowing if you're on the right track or not. Because then,
yeah,
yeah, we never kind of hit a point where,
I get it.
yeah,
And there's nothing more famous, Steve, than Australia may not have a Masters winner on a decision became from a caddy, Mr. Stephen Williams, in regards to a green
right.
read on that player file, right? So that green read that Mr. Steve Williams, when he changed Adam Scott's line, right, on the player file there, and then he went on to win the Masters, right? So on a green reading decision, which I think is really, really cool. And a lot of people don't know that story, right? But Stephen, you've been great. Thanks for your time, mate. Look forward to having you here at the golf schools and many more to come. Take care.
Should be fun. Cheers, mate.